special meeting for Monday, May 23rd. I call this meeting to order. Up first, we'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. And City Clerk, can you take roll call?
Will do. Member Anderson?
Present.
Member Newnenkamp?
Present.
Member Russell?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Here.
Member Wink?
Present.
Member Woodward?
Present.
Mayor Sierra?
Present.
All 7 present.
Thank you. We have 3 study session items for tonight, and then 1 City Council ordinance. Up first, though, would be the City Attorney, Tamara Niles, and Mike Sandgren, a community member and chair of the Change the Trend. They are here present to discuss the use of the public right-of-way and how it may be regulated. I believe, City Attorney, will you be leading us off?
I will.
Thank you.
This matter came to our office because there were several people laying and sitting on sidewalks on Broadway, blocking portions of the sidewalks. So we received a request as to what the city can do about that to ensure that everyone has access to the city sidewalks on Broadway and to ensure that the businesses' entrances aren't obstructed. In this process, we determined that some people were on private property, which is a different issue, and some people were on public property. So we will discuss both of those. The focus of this presentation is not private property, so we will just touch on that, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. The city already has ordinances that regulate the use of our right-of-way and obstructions and blocking the city right-of-way. We do require a permit for street furniture or appurtenances in the public right-of-way, but we don't have anything that specifically refers to sitting or laying down directly on the sidewalk. EMC, of course, that's Inglewood Municipal Code, section 11-3-3, encroachment, states that it's unlawful for any person to obstruct a street or sidewalk with debris, automobiles, or other materials of substance. But again, it doesn't specifically refer to sitting or lying on the sidewalks. It also says it's unlawful for any person to place or allow to be placed any obstructions on any of the sidewalks or streets. But it doesn't specifically say that an obstruction is a human body temporarily sitting or lying on the sidewalk and blocking it. Now, privately owned sidewalks or entries, the owner has full discretion to regulate their own property. I was going to say their personal property, but legally personal property are items. And of course, this is real property, which is real estate. So unlike the city, private property owners can direct people to leave and not come back. Private property owners can tell people, you can't lay on my entrance, you have to get out of here. Private property owners can call the police for assistance to remove people if they refuse to leave. Private properties can call the police even to request someone be cited for the criminal offense of trespass. Now that's significantly different than what the city can do because the property we own is generally open to the public. So we can't just tell someone they have to leave. And of course we addressed that in our trespass ordinance back in December that went into effect in February. And that requires us to have some standards of behavior and give people notice that they're violating our standards of behavior. But the standard of behavior, of course, don't reference sitting or lying across sidewalks either. The case that everyone follows regarding regulation of city sidewalks is Martin v. City of Boise. This is also a case that applies to camping on public property, but for our purposes today, we're not specifically talking about that. But it's the same analysis. It says that the city's not required to provide shelter for people experiencing homelessness or allow anyone to sit, lie, or sleep on the streets at any time and at any place. But this case does say that you cannot remove people from sleeping in public property or criminalize it if they have nowhere else to go, because people experiencing homelessness are people first, and everyone has a right to sleep. And so if we did a flat prohibition of sleeping on public property or sleeping anywhere in the city, for example, people have to have a place to sleep. So that's what this case stands for. And of course, it's a very long opinion, and I just summarized it very quickly. This is another quote from that case. Even where shelter is unavailable, an ordinance prohibiting sitting, lying, or sleeping outside at particular times or in particular locations might well be constitutionally permissible. And so I cited this section of the opinion because it specifically says that we can, in certain circumstances, adopt an ordinance that prohibits the obstruction of public rights of way or sitting and lying across sidewalks. And this was just another quote from that opinion, which a judge filed a concurrence with the majority opinion. And he noted the city, in that case, the city of Boise, was right about the limited nature of the opinion. It only held that municipal ordinances that criminalize sleeping, sitting, or lying in all public places when no alternative sleeping space is available violates the Eighth Amendment. Then to regulation of lying and sitting down on public right-of-way. The city can legally consider prohibiting lying down or sitting on certain public right-of-way or sidewalks. And this is because people, if they lay across our sidewalks, they can interfere with vehicles, pedestrian traffic, and entrances. Because of course, other citizens have rights to use our sidewalks. Business owners have rights to ensure people can enter their businesses. And I just put some options up here. It could apply to only commercial areas. The city could consider perhaps prohibiting this on our busier sidewalks, or perhaps even maybe our more narrow sidewalks. My first concern with the number of people that we've observed at times laying across the sidewalks is if it's sufficiently blocked. I would hate for someone in a wheelchair to not be able to go down our sidewalk because someone is lying across it and they don't have another option. It's not like they can step off the sidewalk and go around. If the city does wish to consider this further, we would recommend a traffic study to determine the propriety of the prohibition and in which areas of the city it is appropriate. We have completed some traffic studies already, so if the City Council would like for us to study this further, we would first start with the traffic studies we already have, so that we can use those as a base rather than pay for a completely new one. We would also study the impacts on those experiencing homelessness versus the rights of pedestrians to utilize sidewalks. Now, because this does impact people experiencing homelessness, we did want to provide to you a description of other resources. Oh, no, I'm trying to nonchalantly pass the remote down, and that didn't work out. So we did want to provide a description of some of the other resources that are provided within the city of Inglewood to people experiencing homelessness. So I will turn that over to Mike to provide that information.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Like City Attorney Niles mentioned, policies like this don't relate exclusively to folks experiencing homelessness, but obviously there's generally quite a bit of interaction between that community and policies such as this. So I was asked to come in and give a list of existing services within the City of Inglewood for individuals experiencing homelessness, as well as preview, you all know the Tri-Cities Homeless Action Plan was passed last year, preview some of the contents of that plan and what we can expect to see over the next number of years in terms of increases in services, and then provides just some thoughts around best practices for when mitigation of camps or folks who are laying out needs to happen, some best practices of how to go about doing that in a compassionate way. So this list I limited to the city of Inglewood. Obviously, functionally, when service provider, maybe a law enforcement officer is working with somebody, they're thinking regionally. They're looking for what's most immediate, but then obviously there's a regional scope as well. But for the purposes of this presentation, this list exists just in Inglewood, and I also limited it to agencies that have kind of brick and mortar space. There are some other services such as the co-responder program, the case manager with the Inglewood PD. But for this list, this is just where folks can go, brick and mortar, that has space that's equipped to welcome folks experiencing homelessness. So Giving Heart has been around for a long time. It's a daytime resource center. It's open currently on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Movement 5280 is another resource center that's been around for maybe 5-6 years. Within the city of Inglewood. They're open most days of the week, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays for one service or another. I believe Wednesdays are their primary kind of large group gatherings, but they would be open on those other days as well. Our community cafe, Cafe 180, is open Tuesday through Saturday, and obviously operates a hybrid model. Is a space for paying customers, but is also a space for some of our community members who are experiencing homelessness. Severe Weather Shelter Network is open seasonally, and they provide overnight shelter on dangerously cold nights. I believe their metric is if it's 20 degrees and dry, or 32 degrees and wet, or 20 degrees and dry, they'll activate. Historically, they partner with churches to provide congregate shelter. For the past couple years, in response to COVID, they've been contracting with motels to provide non-congregate shelter during those nights. They're open October through April when they need to be. Hat Force historically works in conjunction with Severe Weather Shelter Network to provide, again, the seasonal overnight shelter on those same dangerously cold nights. Hat Force serves families and individuals who might not do well in the congregate setting, they historically contract with motels to provide shelter. You can imagine some of our community members with significant mental illness or pets, for example, who just need extra accommodations on those nights. Hat Force steps in to provide that for them. House of Hope is located in Inglewood. This is a branch of Family Tree, which is a large nonprofit that operates regionally, but their local House of Hope provides rapid rehousing services for families, and they have, as often as beds are available, I believe they have about 30, 40 beds within their shelter. As often as beds are available, they're available for folks to find respite. They have about a month-long stay, intensive case management to help families navigate to what's next. And then The Well, this is my program at Wellspring. We're only open one day a week, but we cover some of the weekend hours on Sundays. We offer a resource center, food bank, medical clinic, etc. Within the Tri-Cities Homeless Action Plan, these are some of the things we can expect to see happen in the next few years. The Bridge House Ready to Work program, I know you all are familiar with that. It's a transitional housing workforce development program. Is under contract on a facility right now, looking to renovate it in the next year or so, and hopefully Q1, Q2, 2023, they would be able to start operating within the city of Inglewood. We've also established a subgroup of the Tri-Cities Homelessness Policy Group to focus on implementation of a navigation center, which would be a center focused on client navigation and case conferencing. Hopefully that's slated as a year 2, so 2023 goal in the action plan. The action plan also calls for a coordinated outreach team, which is a team dedicated specifically to going out and making contact for service referrals to community members who are experiencing homelessness. The mobile response unit looks at it's a van focused on those non-emergency medical and behavioral health responses. This is actually being launched in coordination with the Inglewood Police Department this year, 2022. And then the action plan also calls for the exploration of a safe parking pilot program to pilot what it would look like to take more of a harm reduction approach to folks who are staying overnight in a dedicated space for overnight parking of cars. And that would be a year 2 goal as well, 2023. Best practices when policies like this do interact with folks who are staying outside, maybe camping. Communication ideas, providing clarity around where sitting and lying is not allowed through signage, even on the front end helps to mitigate so folks can know, this public area is not a place where I can sit down, lie down, etc. Working collaboratively with service providers and the co-responders, police, homeless case manager, and mobile response unit. We have a number of services that exist for the purpose of helping make these connections with some of our homeless community members and make some of those referrals to services. So working collaboratively with them would be a best practice. And then conducting targeted outreach prior to any mitigation that happens and giving a specific time frame for folks to clear out. Advance notice. In the past, we've looked at timeframes about 72 hours, for example, when mitigation work has had to happen, just as an advance warning for folks to be able to make plans to move on. And helping establish plan to help move belongings, especially when camping is occurring. Folks have a lot of stuff sometimes, and having a plan in place to help kind of facilitate moving some of that stuff along is very helpful in the overall process. And then really bringing service provider partners along actually during the mitigation process has proven to be a way to help bridge the relational gap as well as engage the process compassionately. Questions, I guess, for both of us?
I do have just one thing to add. When we talked about sitting and lying down on sidewalks, we're not referring to sitting on benches or public areas that are designed for sitting. We're solely referencing people that are sitting across sidewalks that are meant for pedestrian travel. So, of course, everyone can sit on a city bench and utilize that service that we provide that's open to the public, and we're not suggesting that be changed in any way.
Thank you, City Attorney Niles and Mr. Sandgren for the presentation. Council, I see Member Russell, you can lead us off.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So how would this impact tonight on the way over here? There's a line at the Gothic Theater and people are in chairs and, you know, sitting on the sidewalk there too. Would that impact that? And I'm assuming it's for a program tonight.
We would have to, well, the traffic study would look at that if we decide to go that route. But any language regarding obstructions on the sidewalks would have to be carefully worded. Although technically right now we have a prohibition against placement of street furniture on a city sidewalk without a permit. So perhaps they're not in compliance with current municipal code. I'm not giving a legal opinion. I'm just throwing that out there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Attorney Niles and Mr. Sandgren. Good to see all of the things we do have in place or coming up with the Tri-Cities Homelessness Action Plan. The one hole that seems to be especially relevant to this issue, especially in regard to the legal opinion around prohibitions of sitting or lying on public property, is sheltering. What do we have in the works on the Tri-Cities Homelessness Action Plan for sheltering, or outside of that, what are the nearest sheltering facilities that we have access to, and do we have any transportation options to those facilities?
Yeah, I can take this one. It's a good question. The closest kind of large capacity overnight shelters are going to be the ones downtown. Think Denver Rescue Mission, Samaritan House. Out in Aurora, they have the Comitas Shelter. Those are going to be the closest kind of low barrier, easy access overnight sheltering. As you saw in the list, we do have some options for overnight sheltering in Inglewood, Severe Weather Shelter Network and Hatforce, but they do operate seasonally. They activate only on a kind of as needed basis. In terms of the homeless action plan, the plan doesn't call for the establishment of a shelter system in the sense of providing a shelter bed for every, kind of numerical proportionate. Every person who's experiencing homelessness has a shelter bed. The question is kind of an open question around whether the navigation center would include a kind of overnight component, but the idea there is that it's not a shelter that would be available or even comprehensive. It would be an overnight capacity to be able to facilitate the navigation services that would provide, but that's probably the closest that the action plan comes to sheltering.
Okay, just a follow-up in terms of the Boise case. Does the severe weather sheltering do anything to help meet the requirements of having shelter beds available? Or since those are only on specific nights, is that?
That case, another portion that we didn't really talk about applies to camping bans, camping prohibitions that cities across the state are also considering. And as far as a camping ban, it says that it can be banned overnight. Camping, sleeping can be banned, but there has to be some place for people to go. There has to be some place people can sleep. And so if you are going to remove someone from camping, they have to have an option, which means there has to be a place where they can legally camp. So some cities, say, are designating parks or certain areas where you can legally camp, or there has to be a shelter bed or some sort of bed available for them to go to. So if it's only seasonally available, then that analysis would only apply when those beds are available.
And would available shelter beds, I guess I'm just asking the questions for if we were to consider a more broad camping ban, would the shelter beds availability in Denver meet the qualifications for a camping ban in Inglewood if there were available shelter beds?
I have not researched that issue
Okay.
specifically, but I've thought quite a bit about it because I had the same question, but I didn't know we were going to discuss it tonight. What I suspect is that it probably is okay as long as we give them the ability to get there. For example, if someone doesn't have any money to maybe get on the light rail or to pay a bus, then that's really not a shelter bed that's available to them if it's not walking distance. So there may be a component where we have to provide them transportation or assistance to be able to avail themselves of that shelter bed. But that's my preliminary thought after thinking about it for a
Sure.
week, but I haven't researched it yet.
And so most of what those regulations wouldn't apply if we just go with a prohibition against obstructing the public right of way or don't have any place available in the city for a homeless person to go.
Yes, if we're just looking at a prohibition against obstructing sidewalks, then we don't have to do that complete analysis. Now, if we were to consider a potential ban of camping on all city property and all right-of-way, then that analysis would be critical.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Mayor Pro Tem Ward, then Member Woodward, then Member Newcamp.
To me, I think you just kind of hit on the heart of the matter, which is the goal, as far as I see it, or my goal in discussing this is we have tens of thousands of cars driving through our city every day, primarily down Broadway and other major corridors. And when they drive down Broadway, they see Inglewood as a municipal homeless shelter of sorts. The homeless campers on either side of Broadway make people less inclined, in my opinion, to view Inglewood as a place where you can come, enjoy a night out of town, spend your money, and go home. So if I was writing this, I would say Broadway is a no-go zone. And what you've just said kind of indicates that we would be allowed to do that, because we're not saying you can't camp in Inglewood. We're just saying you can't camp anywhere on Broadway, because that part of town is carved out or protected or specifically prohibited. So you could go 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks east or west, north or south, but you can't be here. And I think that mitigates the problem that I see, or a lot of the problem that I see, which is I hear from people who don't live in my town but drive through it every day and say, what's going on with your town? Like, what are all these campers doing in Inglewood? And I don't think that's a good look for us. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Woodward.
Yeah, I have a different question on the severe weather shelter network and the HAAT force. In the past, we had a problem trying to get that put together because of zoning, building codes, ADA access, and egress. So on, for example, a church in your former church, that was one that we were working with the church to get to be overnight. We couldn't get there. We didn't get there with the codes and stuff. So that, I'm just wondering, has that changed in the last 10 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. The severe weather shelter network, to my knowledge, has not contracted with a church within the city limits of Inglewood to provide the overnight shelter. Their model, historically, I believe they're making a couple adjustments gearing up for next year. And of course, for the past 2 years, they've been in motels, so that the congregate sheltering in churches hasn't been a consideration. But how their model has worked traditionally is they would operate a warming station within the city that they're serving. So, for example, Giving Heart has served in that capacity previously, and folks who are in need of shelter would meet at the warming station at a certain time, say 4 p.m. That's just for example, that's not the exact time. But they would meet there, and then they would actually be given transport to, historically, it's been a little bit of a kind of a larger suburban church that has a little bit more square footage than any of the options in Inglewood. So that's where they would receive shelter, and then they'd actually get transported back to the warming station in the morning. And so that's how Severe Weather Shelter Network has navigated that historically. As they're gearing up for next year, they're kind of actively looking for church partners. And I think it'll kind of, depending on what partnerships emerge, it'll to be determined whether it'll be a church in Inglewood or whether it will be within the region and transportation services would be needed.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see, I had another question, but let me come back to that.
Thank you, Member Woodward. We'll come back to you, Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I was encouraged when I was preparing for the meeting that I saw that this conversation we're having tonight was framed as one where compassion is the goal and how we think about this as a community. And I'm proud of the work that Inglewood has done over the last few years, our involvement in the Tri-Cities Action Plan, the work of EPD. I think we've made a lot of great steps, and nothing's a silver bullet and nothing is going to happen tomorrow, right? These are long-term plans for the good of our community, and I'm really grateful for that. My perspective coming into the conversation is, and the goal that I would like to get out of it is, how do we share our city with one another? And how do we do that well? And my goal is not to keep people that we think maybe aren't desirable out of sight. And my goal is not to just move people to places that make it feel better for us. It's how do we share the community well? And so to that end, my question is for the city attorney. Why are you recommending, or why are you bringing a proposal, not recommending, but for sit and lie, and not just increasing the existing obstruction piece in the code to say you can't obstruct a sidewalk with your body or with your belongings? Why is it sit and lie? Can you help me understand the difference there?
Actually, that would be, if city council wants to move forward, that's how we would implement it, is just to amend that obstruction section to include specifically sitting and lying across the sidewalk.
Is there a possibility, though, that someone could be sitting on a sidewalk and not obstructing it?
That's what the traffic study would tell us, is they would provide guidance as to the appropriate amount of regulation. And as to Mayor Pro Tem Ward's point, when he talks about people driving through the city, it's more, there's so much traffic on Broadway and certain streets. Those were the ones that, not for beautification, but because more traffic and not that that's not a valid point, but because traffic and pedestrian traffic, people lying in the sidewalk are more likely to interfere with the increased pedestrian traffic on Broadway or perhaps Inglewood Parkway or Hampton, something like that. I think I just went on a tangent, and did I answer your question?
It's fine. I think I'm having a hard time understanding how there would be a significant amount of traffic overnight for someone who's sitting maybe on the side and not blocking the sidewalk. And so I think that's where some of my questions at. And what is the purpose of a traffic study? Or could we just say, is there anything prohibiting us, I guess my question is, from all sidewalks in the entire city, not commercial or residential, but just to say that you can't obstruct a sidewalk with your body or with any items? And can we regulate that in some way, or does it need to be specifically in certain areas and sit in line?
No, we could regulate it citywide. I think just because we want to be so careful and respect the rights of everyone, and make sure we don't unduly impair the ability of people experiencing homelessness to rest and to sit and lie. That's the basis for the traffic study, is to limit our regulation to meet the goals. But yes, we could do no sitting or lying across sidewalks in Inglewood because it obstructs the purpose of a sidewalk, which is to allow for pedestrian traffic.
Right, I think that there's probably instances where you could be sitting on a sidewalk and not obstructing it. I think that's my outstanding question, but that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Noonan-Camp. Before I get to Member Anderson, Member Russell, do you mind if I ask my question? Because it's kind of in line with what Member Noonan-Camp was asking. So, City Attorney, just the application of the proposed regulation, what I'm trying to understand is, say we do the traffic study. It does sound to me that the focus, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the purpose here is to identify the most trafficked areas, make sure that it doesn't impede, I guess, the most amount of people, and then potentially put some type of regulation for those public areas, but not so much in other infrequently visited or trafficked areas. So to me, it does sound like that's something that could potentially be pretty fluid in the future, in the sense that if something does become more trafficked, then there may be more there may be regulation for that part of the sidewalk. Am I understanding this correctly in terms of what this could potentially look like?
Yes, and if you do decide to implement some sort of regulation, it could be one of numerous options, and a traffic study would make it the most enforceable, and it would be based on evidence. It would be an evidence-based versus an emotional reaction, and that's why it's recommended that we do that. But legally, there's no requirement that we do a traffic study.
Thank you, City Attorney Niles. Member Anderson?
I have some questions on the traffic study, but I wanted to go back to Member Woodward's question about the zoning related to housing and churches. If I remember correctly, that had to do with our fire safety code, and we changed that, I think, in 2020 to make it so even though we're not sheltering at churches in Inglewood right now, I believe it is legal, based on the conversations we had early on when I was on council. But in regards to the traffic study, would we be studying all areas throughout the city or just certain higher traffic? How are you deciding what areas to study, and what does that, are you like counting people, how many people are walking down the sidewalk, or is this a pedestrian traffic study?
So the scope of the study is not set. That would be established by council. We could study every sidewalk. We could just study the Broadway corridor. We could study what appears to be our busiest sidewalks. But yes, I do anticipate it would be pedestrian traffic. But it is likely to also include a little bit of vehicular traffic to the extent that it could pose a safety hazard to someone that's lying down on the sidewalk. But I think that's unlikely, except maybe on Broadway or Hampton, where there is a significant amount of vehicular traffic.
So here's my overall concern about the traffic study approach. And that is that we're going to come out of and it's also a concern I have with Member Ward's suggestion that we apply it strictly to kind of the Broadway corridor. If we end up with certain areas of the city or certain sidewalks in the city where functionally lying down or sitting is illegal and is enforced, then what happens to the people who are camping in the sidewalks in those areas? Do they just move down the street a little bit, and then are we then just right now it's a problem for one set of business owners? Are we pushing the problem into another set of business owners? So I don't know that I'm really opposed to it as a short-term solution. but I don't think it really is the best solution for our business owners, because I could see it creating some tension among the businesses. I've already got this feedback from the business community that they're concerned that, currently they don't have a problem with people camping outside their properties, but if we started enforcing it in one area, does that mean it's going to just move to another area? So I think like I would love to see in the longer term a broader ban on it, accompanied with all of the compassionate things that are already in the homelessness action plan, plus sheltering, and I think there's some other opportunities with our code next to legalize some things that are currently illegal right now. If I had a friend who became homeless, it would be illegal for me to let him stay in my house right now. We have made it illegal for poor people to stay almost anywhere in our city. And so I would feel much more comfortable with even a much broader restrictions on camping or lying and sitting in the public right of way, if we were also really careful about saying, no, we have made it legal for these different types of housing, or for changed our occupancy laws, or any number of things, and have sheltering availability, or at least transportation to sheltering. But I feel like going the traffic study route, while that might be a decent short-term issue, I'm afraid it's going to come back in a few months with another layer of problems built onto that. And this is one of those wicked problems where everything you do is going to create another set of problems, unfortunately. But I'm interested in doing the traffic study, but have concerns about it from kind of a longer term perspective. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate the discussion. Actually, I feel somewhat, I did a council request. I wanted to know an answer, and then this came back that it should be something that we discussed. And I'm really thankful that it has come back, that we should discuss it. I don't only think it's a business owner's problem. I think it is a problem, but I think there's also a safety problem. I know people have told me they're afraid to walk down the streets, and that is problematic. And I think we need to be compassionate also on those people that are paying the taxes in this city. And I am thankful for the homelessness study, and there are resources, but I think we need to think outside of the box also, because we have other people here that need taken care of as well. So I wouldn't disagree with Mayor Pro Tem, but I think there's also other problems. I've had handicapped people tell me that they ride the light rail, and they've said you can tell where Inglewood begins and where Inglewood ends because of all the homeless population there. I think a lot of the things that we're doing to increase business and get more businesses, if we don't deal with this problem, I had a well-known businessman in the city tell me 2 years ago, until we stop allowing people to sleep on the trails, Inglewood is going nowhere. He used to bring his grandson down here bicycle riding, and he said, I won't go in Inglewood anymore. And I think that we need to consider that. We can't just forget those issues. So I appreciate the discussion. I'm not sure that a traffic study will help us. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Any other comments before we start asking for start giving directions towards our city attorney? I can start if you like in terms of what I foresee here, but I'll start since I don't see any other lights. But I kind of agree with Member Anderson. I do want to move forward with the traffic study, but I do believe that this may open up additional concerns. Where exactly, if we were to put something in place, what happens with that current population that is obstructing sidewalks? My concern is that they're just going to move into neighborhoods, into other areas that may not be as populated, but will still affect our citizens. But I still feel it's worthwhile. It's one of those situations where it's just going to be, there is no right answer. And we're taking all the steps, as Member Noonan-Kemp stated, we're taking a lot of steps in terms of just trying to solve for, or solve is not the right word. It's just something that's going to be ongoing, and it's just something that we're going to try to work on to make it as least of a problem as we currently have. But I would be up for the traffic study. Current boundaries that I was just thinking of, and feel free for any members of council to disagree, but I was thinking DDA boundaries, all of Broadway. I was also thinking of the commercial areas around Federal and Bellevue. Those were my initial thoughts, but if anybody wants to add to it or just change that up a bit, that's basically what I was thinking of. But any other heavily populated areas, I guess, would also be part of that. But those were my initial thoughts. Anyone else want to jump in or disagree with me? Member Woodward, I think that was you.
I guess with that, I would just like to understand why, if I were ran a business, a commercial business up on the hill, for example, there's no study that's going on up there from what I just heard you say. And so what I'm hearing is, right or wrong, is that it's okay if that area became an area utilized, a commercial area utilized for homeless people sleeping and night camping. And I don't know, the traffic study, unless it is very broad and stuff, I don't know how you're going to get by. Why is it this place and not that place? Do you value me less as a commercial business here than you value them? So that's my thought on that.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Is there any, so from what I understand, you would want to do a broad study about the entire city of Inglewood, or also just include commercial to the areas that I stated?
Certainly the commercial areas. I mean, I feel strongly about the residential areas, especially around schools and stuff, that those aren't places for homeless camping or homeless groups or sleeping, you know, first from safety points of view, or at least perceived safety points.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Anderson.
I agree with Member Woodward. I'm concerned that if we draw a narrow, a set of boundaries around the DDA, like I think just DDA boundary, there are areas of the DDA that I think are hopefully, vibrant commercial centers one day, but right now maybe aren't quite there yet. And so maybe don't need that kind of study. And then there are places right outside of the DDA boundaries that I think would be, that we would get a lot of negative feedback from the businesses outside of there showing favoritism towards the DDA or something like that. I'm wondering if thinking of this as kind of step one of maybe a longer process, or even a much longer process, to see if we can really get all the pieces in place. Is there a way to do it a little more objectively? And I don't know, maybe this is for city attorney or city manager. Like, could we take something like maybe we already have data on how busy, what are our busiest streets, which each have the most car traffic. Say, okay, let's study study all the streets with the most car traffic, or study all the retail districts along the streets with the most car traffic, or something like that, to give us a first step, and then see if we need to go and expand it out from there. But rather than drawing boundaries that I think could very easily be interpreted as showing favor to certain areas or certain business over the other, to do it in a way that shows we're just starting with our auto traffic data that we already have, and moving out from there and expanding it beyond that if necessary. Is that possible or reasonable? Would that, I'm getting a head nod, it sounds like that maybe would be something. I would rather do that than try to define it up front.
May I also respond?
Yeah.
The only thing that I would caution with regard to that is if this is truly about pedestrian access, then using cars as the benchmark indicates that we're worried about a visibility problem and an aesthetics problem, if you will. I don't like using that term in this context, as opposed to truly being concerned about sitting in line. But
That's
the
fair.
interesting point is that I think that those are one and the same, with the exception of maybe Hamden, which doesn't have a tremendous amount of pedestrian traffic. But I would say Broadway and Hamden are probably two of our
Yeah.
more pedestrian friendly, so maybe it's one and the same.
And well, I think of streets like, Bellevue and Santa Fe, to the extent that they're in Inglewood, don't have much pedestrian traffic, and I don't really want to. I'm not interested in studying, busy streets that aren't also pedestrian streets. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but trying to think of a way to do it that doesn't come down to city council just deciding these are the places where we want to study and these aren't. Maybe someone else has a better suggestion.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Noonenkamp.
Yeah, I actually have a quick question. City Attorney Niles, when you wrote a recommendation for a traffic study, or that would be part of your recommendation, can you walk through, in your opinion, what that looks like? Is this something that we contract out? Is this something that we're going to have to, is there a budgetary concern here or consideration and timeline? Can you walk me through, like, what's the process of the traffic study?
Well, I have seen a traffic study that another city did when considering something similar. It was actually fairly short, just a few pages, but we didn't go through pricing it at this point yet because we weren't sure if council would want to move forward with it, nor what the scope would be. So if it's a significant amount of money, of course, we would then bring it to council. But if we already have money budgeted and appropriated for studies like this, and it's within the funds that are still available, then we would not, as long as it's within the city manager's contracting authority. But so really, to answer your question, we needed to know more about how you wish to move forward and what we are looking at. But the one I saw again was really fairly short.
And just for my own clarification, if we do this more broadly instead of just in certain areas based on traffic, the ramification is that there is essentially nowhere left in the city for folks experiencing homelessness to sleep. Is that correct? That there no private property, no shelters, no parks, no sidewalks. There's nowhere else to sit or lie down. Is that correct?
Well, legally, we cannot prohibit every place in the city. There has to be some place where people can sleep, whether that be on public property or in a shelter. So only if there are other options can we prohibit it citywide.
Right, and my question is, I'm sorry, that if we were to say you cannot obstruct a sidewalk to traffic, would that basically eliminate every single sidewalk to people sitting down or lying down in the city? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. There are some privately owned areas that would be subject to regulation by the owner. For example, there were people lying in front of Kaufman's on Broadway that was a privately owned area. So this would not apply to any privately owned area if we just amended the right-of-way section to include sitting and lying on sidewalks as a defined obstruction. We also, if we just included sidewalks, it wouldn't apply to other city right-of-way. So it depends on how we word it, because we could word it to prohibit sitting and lying on all city right-of-way, in which case then that makes it more expansive instead of just sidewalks. So it really depends on how we word it, but we can't enact any law that would prohibit or not allow for a place for people to sleep.
And to remember Russell's point earlier about folks sitting, in line at the Gothic, is there a way to write an ordinance that you cannot obstruct a sidewalk without implying sitting in line? You just can't obstruct it with anything?
I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. Could you clarify?
I can. Give me a second. I want to choose my words wisely. And I want to make sure as I'm asked to give direction on this tonight, or what I would like to see us do, that I understand all of our options. And I think my question is around some of the concerns that have already been brought up about the traffic study, and some of my concern about some of that maybe being as city manager said, focus more on how we are appearing to others or some of those aesthetics. And that's something that I'm not comfortable with, but I am concerned with how do we ensure pedestrian safety on sidewalks and also provide a place for people who cannot find another place to sleep, an opportunity to do so? And is there a better way to write the ordinance that we can share the sidewalk somehow where you can sit down on it, but you can't obstruct it? And is there a way to do that in a wide sidewalk or not? I'm just trying to understand, is there another option here besides the ones that have been presented, if that makes sense?
One thing that comes to mind is perhaps prohibiting any sort of obstruction that would not leave a minimum clearance on the sidewalk. And I keep thinking about someone whose mobility is limited. If someone cannot go around, that they have to have access to the sidewalk, maybe 3 feet wide, it seems like we could write the ordinance to say, but at a minimum, there must be at least 3 foot of every sidewalk available for pedestrian traffic. And I think that could respond to your concern. Perhaps someone could sit down on a very wide sidewalk, but as long as there's still a sufficient clearance, we could define it so that it's not a prohibited obstruction. Although then I think you'd also want to consider the amount of pedestrian traffic to accommodate. For example, I keep thinking of Broadway. It's such a wide sidewalk, but I could see 2 people in wheelchairs passing each other. So in which case you probably want at least 6.5 feet wide. And these are just numbers that I'm pulling out. I know generally you want at least 3 feet, 36 inches of clearance for someone in a wheelchair. At least that was the old number. I'm not sure if that's still the case. 42. So then maybe we would need 84 inches before it's an obstruction. So I think there are some ways we could draft it to respond to your concerns that would also be objectively enforceable.
That's helpful. It's clarifying. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Newcamp. Member or City Manager Lewis, do you have something to add?
Thank you, Mayor. Mike Sandgren had to leave, but he and I were talking about the fact that we did fail to mention Ridgeview, which is formerly a youth facility in Aurora that the state has allocated millions of dollars towards converting to a shelter for people experiencing homelessness. We are getting a report, or have asked for a report from Kristen Toombs at DOLA for our next Tri-Cities Homelessness Action Plan, but that will be another bed resource that, it'll probably take 3 years to come online, I suspect, but many cities are putting money, and the state is putting up a lot of money for that. And it is in East Arapahoe County.
Thank you, City Manager Lewis. City Attorney Niles, it does sound like we have an appetite for the traffic study, just boundaries undefined. Is there any way that you can, unless council has a problem with this, but any way that you can identify what the best route would be in terms of identifying what would be part of the traffic study?
Yes, I'm happy to take a stab at it and make a recommendation.
I would be okay with that if, unless there's clear direction from council on what part of the city to be included as part of this traffic study. Is everyone okay with that? We have some nodding heads. Looks like we do have consensus on that. City Attorney Niles, anything to add?
I don't have anything at this time.
All right. City Attorney Niles, thank you so much. And Mike Sandgren as well. If he's listening back at home, thank you very much for the presentation tonight. Moving on to agenda item 5, this is the monthly financial report. Director of Finance Jackie Loh is here to present the April 2022 monthly financial report. Good evening, Director Loh.
I will review the 2022 April General Fund financials by revenues expenditures tonight. Through April 2022, the city's general fund has received a total of 19.9 million. This amount is 35.9% of budgeted revenue and 2.2 million or 12.7% higher than the same time in 2021. As we review each revenue line item, please note we subtract the one-time revenue expenditure from the financial report as council's prior request. So the 188,000 for sale of the fire training academy was excluded, and also one-time 138,000 for health insurance savings was subtracted. For property taxes, through April 2022, the city has received 3.9 million in property tax. Of that total, 2.3 million went to the general fund, as you can see here, and 192,000 went to EDDA, and the rest to debt services for the Parks and Rec GO bond and the police building. And sales and use tax remittances total 13.7 million, and are 38.9% of fiscal budgeted revenue. The total taxes received is 2.3 million higher than the same time last year. Additionally, our tax audits and voluntary disclosure collections amount to 147,000. Marijuana sales tax accounts for $553,000, which is $125,000 lower than the same time last year. However, if we compare this number to the year-to-date April 2021, the number is pretty close. Let's take a look at the intergovernmental revenue. The American Rescue Plan Act, the city has been awarded 8.7 million, which will be received in two allocations of 4.3 million. The first allocation was received in June last year. The second allocation is expected to be received in June this year. For 2021, the general fund has recognized 689,000 of the ARPA funding, of which 50,000 went to the workforce training and 30,000 to vaccinations and 609,000 for homelessness. On May 2nd, Council approved a 337,000 budget supplemental for the 2022 ARPA allocation for the following projects: 50,000 for the local business staff recruitment bonus program, and 258,000 went to career guidance construction of a new workspace provided by Cross Purpose, and 29,000 went to the Arapahoe County coordinator position. This is for city's portion. And investment earnings are negative and 255,000 less than the same time last year due to a rise in increase rates. These negative returns are due to unrealized losses. Let me give you more information on this unrealized losses. When the city purchased a bond above or below the par, or we can say principal, the yield, or the general terms, the rate of return is guaranteed. However, during the course of the financial movement, the short-term value of the bond fluctuates. So when the interest rates increase, the bond value decreases. However, the unrealized gains or losses will not be realized at the end of the maturity date. So this is just temporary. If you have a chance to review the investment performance report we posted online, at the end of April, the year-to-date rate of return is negative 2.01% compared to the U.S. Treasury 1 to 5 year benchmark. The rate of return is negative 3.72%. So our performance is still better than the benchmark. And on the investment performance report on page 9, you will see the maturity distribution of securities held. 98% of the city's bonds is, we invest in the bonds shorter than 3 years. So 1/3 is probably below 180 days, 1/3 is between 180 days and 1 year. The rest probably between 1 to 3 years. So we only invest in very short-term bond market. And this is the top 11 revenue sources. You can see our specialty retail sectors, marketplace facilitators, manufacturing, and healthcare. They all outperform the same time last year in terms of sales use tax. And this is sales use tax revenue collected as a cash received in the past 4 years. This accumulated change in sales use tax collected in the past 5 years, the increase is 7.9 million. This is a sales tax map by areas. You can see we move the market facilitator sectors from Area 7 to Area 14. This is another presentation of sales use tax collections by areas. Regarding the expenditures year to date are 19 million or 34.2% fiscal year. The total expenditures year to date are 839,000 or 4.6% higher by the same time last year. The majority of the variances are due, compared to the same time last year, are due to compensations. Across all classifications, we increased the salaries, wage of staff by 3.5%. For the public works, you can see they have a higher spending. This is largely due to additional SURF spending on vehicles. And Parks and Rec library expenditures are 120,000 above last year due to facilities being fully staffed and fully open in 2022. I want to remind Council the budget supplemental number 2 of 3.7 million, including a 2.9 million for COP payoff, will be reflected in the May financials, and we're scheduled to pay off the COP on June 1st, including the principal, but will save interest for this December and June 1st next year. This is another way to review our expenditures. We broke down expenditures by each category: personnel, commodities, contractual services, capital, debt services. You can see for the contractual services, we are much higher due to, some is due to timing, some is due to additional cost. The soft license, we pay down the soft license a little earlier. Janitorial services cost 80,000, but that amount, that item is offset by personnel costs and additional plan review costs. Commodity expenditures include such items like fuels, chemicals, or building supplies. You can see for commodities, fuels alone are 84,000 higher than 2021. Building costs are extremely high, and chemicals. We expect those items will continue, the price will continue to increase. Contractual services include items such as fire emergency services contract, software maintenance agreements, and property works compensation insurance costs. We know some of the contractual services will increase, probably starting this year and in 2023. So at the end of April, we have operating surplus 909,000 compared to an operating deficit of $500,000 last year. Just remember, we're going to pay down some debt, and additional budget supplemental will be reflected in May. Yeah. This is general fund transfers. We have transfer out of a general fund, the transfer $134,000 for debt services for renewed energy debt service. We also transfer $32,000 out for a capital project and 150,000 for DDA. This is general fund balance. We broke down the ending fund balance by table restriction, long-term assets reserve fund committed by council, and ARPA funding restricted by federal requirements, and unrestricted revenue, which is estimated by 16.7% total revenue at this juncture. Just remember the net change in fund balance year-to-date, we show 1.1 million. That number includes the one-time revenue expenditure. When we review the revenue and expenditure, we subtracted a one-time. But in order to get the correct fund balance, we have to include the one-time. Unassigned fund balance is estimated at 6.4 million at this juncture before budget supplemental. This is appendix related to sales tax. And our auditors and our finance manager, Kevin Engels, will review the audited financials with council 2 weeks from today on June the 6th. This concludes my presentation. If you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Director Loh, for that presentation. Any questions from council? Nothing from me tonight. Doesn't look like there's anything else from council. Director Loh, thank you very much for your presentation on the April financials.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Council, we are up for a break. Everybody okay with taking a 10-minute break, or looks like we are. So let's come back right around 7:15. I show 7:06 here, so quarter after. Thanks. It was a tie. All right, everyone, we are back. Up next is Director of Utilities Peter Van Rye and Deputy Director Sarah Stone are here to present and discuss the results from the 2022 customer survey on drinking water quality and the key findings from the Taste and Odor study. Director Van Rye, I'll let you get us started.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We're going to do this in two parts. Sarah's going to present the first part, and I will present the second part. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk through the results of the customer survey.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So I will take us through the drinking water survey and then stop for questions. And then Peter will take over for the taste, odor, and hardness. So our first annual drinking water survey was sent out in customer bills that they started receiving in early February. The survey was open from February 1st through March 31st. It was available for paper pickup at any of the city facilities. So we had them here at the Civic Center. They were available at the Malley Center. They were available at the Rec Center. And those places also took paper copies if folks decided to turn them in there. And there was also a online option for people to fill out that was linked to our website. It was also advertised through social media platforms as well as direct, customer communications through our office. The total number of responses received were 1,331. Just over half of those were hard copies, and then the rest were online. So we went ahead and compiled all of the results. So in your packet, you had a Polco survey summary, and that was all the online responses. And then I took those results and pulled in all the hard copy responses to go through tonight. So each of the questions have a pie chart to show the results. So I'll just briefly run through these. So the first question was, how long have you lived in Inglewood? So it was an interesting split of 40% was 0 to 5 years, and then there was about 40% that's over 20 years. As a response to whether or not people drink Inglewood water, 63% of respondents said that they did, 35% said they didn't, and 2% with no response. Moving on to how would a customer rate the tap water to their home or business, about half said it was poor, while we had about 40% that rated it from average to excellent, and then excellent was 5%, so the smallest part of that. When asked if a device to filter the water was used at their home, 73% responded yes. And the number of people that bought bottled water was split 50-50. When asked about discoloration in their water, and this is really within the last 6 months, 62% of respondents said no, they had not noticed any discoloration, and 35% said that they had. Moving on to taste and odor, this was asking about any improvements seen in the last year, and as you can see, the vast majority of respondents said that there was no change, and less than 25% for each of these questions said that there was minor improvement. And we're trying to set up a baseline here, because this would really be a result we'd want to track over the next several years as we really start to ramp up our investment in capital for the water system. So next, moving on to the costs of services, we asked folks to rate the cost of the drinking water. So as you can see here, 41% said that it was good, 13% said it was excellent. There were a few that said unacceptable, and about 5% that didn't answer. When asked how much they're willing to pay, the way we phrased that question, we talked about the cost of delivering water to the home, which can be done for the typical customer at less than a penny per gallon. So that was the framing for this question, and then they were asked if they were willing to pay that or more. So as you can see here, 23% said that they're willing to pay less than a penny, and then we've got 25% that didn't respond, and then the remainder said that they would pay more. And we would, on some of the paper copies, we had anecdotal comments where I'd pay more if the water tastes better, that we kind of documented as we were going through. The final question was related to, or at least the final multiple choice question was related to the cost of sewer service. So kind of as to be expected here, because it's less visible, there's not a lot of data to gather here other than, good to excellent was the majority of the responses for the cost of sewer. So we had a couple open-ended questions. One was about how much people are willing to pay for a gallon of bottled water. The range was, a penny to $3. There was $9 in there. There were several just, different answers that we couldn't really grab a conclusion from that. There were several write-in answers that were, not applicable, don't buy, shouldn't have to buy, things like that. And then we had quite a large section for people to provide any additional comments. So all of those comments have been provided in your packet. The Polco ones are at the end of that report, and then we compiled all of the paper copy comments and added those to the end of that report. Common themes, again, were the taste of water and then taste, odor, and hardness. Several of the comments mentioned that they didn't necessarily believe the cost of water that was referenced in that question, that to be delivered to a home or a business, it's less than a penny per gallon. So I just wanted to walk through the calculation here. So the components of the water bill are the capital improvement fee for a typical customer of a 3/4 inch meter, and that's $15 a month. The water administration fee is $3.08 per month. And then at a usage rate of $3.58 per 1,000 gallons, the water charge for use of 6,000 gallons is a total of $39.56. So dividing that by 6,000 gallons, which is our typical customer, the result is 0.7 cents per 0.7 cents per gallon. So.
And can you go back to
Yeah,
that slide, please?
sure.
So this changes depending on how much water you use. So because that usage rate is $3.58 per 1,000, as you go above 6,000, if you go to 10,000, if you go to 20,000, as people take the water and use it on their lawns and their landscaping, the cost does rise above a penny per gallon. But when you look at our typical customer at 6,000 gallons of usage, which is generally a high indoor usage rate or a medium indoor usage rate with a certain amount of exterior usage, it translates to less than a penny per gallon. So we had to find a place that we could create an apples to apples comparison, because it does change depending on how much you use. And you would expect that if you're using more water, that incremental cost per 1,000 gallons or per gallon goes up above a penny. Also, it's less than a penny to get a gallon of water delivered to your home through the water system, which is part of what I think I think people just don't understand what they get for the cost of their water service. So as much as we want to understand what the community thinks about the water system and things that we knew anecdotally, but now we're starting to actually get real responses on a structured survey, we also want them to step back and take note of what they're paying for water if they are in fact using bottled water as it compares to what the city charges to deliver water to their home every day. And so there's a couple different baselining of information that we wanted to start to establish through this survey this year. We'll probably adjust it year over year, maybe adjust a question here or there. But really we want to incrementally show a trend of improvement through actual customer feedback, and that's what this baseline survey does for us.
Wrong one. Director Van Rye, you ready for questions, or?
Yes,
you,
yeah,
Director?
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, we're open for questions. I'm gonna let Sarah take the lead. on
Sounds
these.
great. Member Anderson?
Director Van Rye, I'm trying to follow you. So you said it rises over a penny a gallon when you get higher, because if that's 3.35 cents a gallon, so it seems like it would go down as you added quantity.
Is my math wrong on this?
Well, it might be. I'd have to look. But the other thing to consider
I'm going for the bulk
is,
discount.
is the capital improvement fee also
Right.
changes with meter size. So as the meter size
Right.
increases, that it increases as well.
Let's do math on the fly on that one. So what we wanted to basically, it's better if it costs less.
Yeah, sure.
I guess is the point. But I think the thing that we wanted to ensure in this was a standardization to show that it was less than.
And this is close to the average of what a typical single-family home would use.
Exactly.
So, good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. So I have a couple of questions. Is there any way to break this down by area? I mean, it would have been interesting to figure out if all the people that rated water really poor were all in a similar area. Because I think because it's over the whole city, generalized, this may not be a great baseline unless you're tying it to area.
There's great feedback and a refinement that we can actually look at incorporating into next year's survey. The one thing that we would require people to do is list their location, and so sometimes people want to do that on an anonymous survey, sometimes they don't. But it is a refinement that we can absolutely add to help narrow in on maybe there is a particular part of the city that's just historically the worst place for it.
So, and have we increased the number of test sites since our E. coli incident?
We have not increased the number of test sites because the number of test sites is set by the state. And so we maintain the number of test sites that we have per what the requirement is from our state requirements.
Well, didn't we talk about that? About instead, what do we test? 50 different sites across the city?
Yeah, I believe, yeah, the number's 50. I believe that's right. Let me confirm that, but I believe it's 50. So what we looked at doing was, so we weren't changing the number of site test locations. What we are doing is increasing the frequency with which we are inspecting those sites to ensure that they are in top working conditions so that we don't end up with a similar type of situation we had last August, where there was a localized issue on something that we didn't realize was a problem that presented a much larger, broader issue to the system.
Okay, so the testing, and then is it possible the odor and taste could be impacted by the delivery system versus the raw water product?
We think it's both. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. And I think it's an and question. So we think we have data to show, and this is the second part of the presentation. We have data that shows the taste and odor is impacted based on where we draw the raw water from. And we have a treatment process that can handle a lot of that, but then there's a certain amount of it that does end up making its way through into the system. But there are system improvements such as looping, eliminating dead-end lines, the way we move water through the system that could also potentially help improve taste and odor more than hardness in the system based on how we're actually moving water through the system. So the answer is both. It's a we're looking at it from multiple points of view as opposed to just source water and capital investment.
So, and we're starting already to work on the capital investments, like the dead end areas and.
Yes, so we have a priority this year for looping dead end lines, dead end parts of the system. Challenge sometimes with that is there might not be a straightforward way to connect two pipes because there might be a building in the way or something like that. So if you're in a situation where you can't physically create a loop, then what we can do from an operational perspective is flush the hydrant more often we can put a hydrant or some kind of a flushing station at the end of a dead end line, which then gives us the ability to flush that water out if there's a low demand on that system. Typically you get more low demand in the winter because sprinkler systems create a demand on the system that really does move water through quickly, through the system faster when you get to the winter, sometimes water will sit in the pipes longer. And that's where either a loop or a flushing protocol could help improve that.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have one more question. Why do we use 6,000 gallons as the minimum when I believe Denver uses 5,000?
We use 6,000 as our typical because that's also what we use on the sewer side. So it's something that it's been a historic usage since prior to me coming here. 6,000 has been a typical. So we don't call it average. It's not average. It's more of a typical customer usage. As we further evaluate the sewer rate structure and its correlation to the water rate structure, which is something we plan to do likely next year, we'll look at it, is that 6,000 gallon number still the correct number for our community? And so it's probably gone down over time. This is a residual of something that has been done this way for probably a couple decades. And it's something that we're planning to look at. We need to look at it more on the sewer side first, which will involve changing the rate structure for the sewer system.
Okay, and then just one comment. I have listened to some of the people that have come with public comment, and like if they're using the minimum, there are a lot of people that, you know, have xeriscaped their yard, single family home, and there really is no motivation for them to save water is what they're saying. So anyway, I just wanted to.
That's true. That perspective is true. I think the challenge with water conservation, and as you tie that to rates, is as people use less, and this is the issue that Denver Water faced when they really instituted restrictions in the early 2000s, was people listened to them and they stopped using water, right? And then all of a sudden they didn't have enough money to pay for the investment in the system. So then they had to, as a corollary, they had to adjust rates because the system expenditure need is set. So we try to establish as stable of a revenue to meet that need through the rate structure, both on the sewer side and the water side. And that's why we look at the fixed costs and the variable costs to try and create as strong a predictability of the revenue to the expense, so that we're not left in a situation where there's not enough money generated to meet the needs of the system. And that's what we're looking at on the sewer side.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Woodward.
On the baseline, is that relevant for the first couple of years here? If we're just getting stuff, we really don't, I mean, we won't have anything put in place that would make a difference, do we, in the first couple of years?
It takes time to ramp up projects, so I don't think, by next year, this customer survey may look all very similar.
Yeah.
So the results of the survey may look similar.
So I'm guessing that it's really, the survey's really going to be relevant to us 3 years from now when it comes in, because there should have, hopefully, there's going to be qualitative changes by that time, or three and a half years.
So we've got two things that I think at play here. One is the capital investment, which is you're probably right, it's looking at it like a 3-year window before we start to really see the effect of that investment. The more short term is if we make some operational changes. And so if the survey yields an incremental improvement in terms of results based on some of the operational improvements that don't necessarily require a significant amount of capital investment, but require modeling and analysis, which we can do in a shorter period of time, we might actually see an incremental uptick in next year's survey if we handle a couple of these issues like water rage and looping and things like that. So I'm not going to bank on that, but I'm optimistic that maybe we'll see some kind of an incremental improvement because of those operational changes.
Yeah, okay. And when you said water age, that's the water age in the tanks?
It's a water age in the system. So we produce water at the plant, and the second it leaves the plant, It's in the distribution system, whether it's in the pipes or in the tanks or a combination of both, before someone pulls it out of their tap at their house.
Yes.
We have a small, compact system, so our water age numbers are actually really low. They're really good water age numbers, but you can always improve those, and the more you improve those, the better the water quality, the water aesthetic is when people actually pull it out of their tap. There are other systems, much larger systems like Denver system or Aurora system or some of the regionalized system, where water age is talked about in weeks, and water will sit in the system for weeks, moving from Aurora all the way down to Castle Rock through a series of interconnects and pipelines, that it'll take 2 weeks from the time it's produced at Aurora until it gets to Castle Rock, where it then enters their distribution system and moves through that distribution system for maybe another week or something like that. It's actually why we use chloramines as a disinfectant, is because chloramines has a longer disinfection residual than free chlorine. And since we're surrounded by entities that utilize chloramines, we're on chloramines as well, which is good to be consistent in case we ever have to have an emergency interconnect. There's a little bit on water chemistry.
Okay. So I guess my next question was, how fast do those tanks empty? And what I'm hearing is they empty pretty quick. Obviously, the summer would be much quicker than the middle of the winter.
Yeah, part of the challenge with tanks is you always want to leave enough in them so that they have the pressure so that you can run water through the system. And so then it becomes this dance of filling tank up, drawing it down, filling tank up, drawing it down, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to send water in, short circuit, come back out, and then leave this slug of water at the top of the tank because it's always full. If it's always full, then you may not be cycling through the tank as fast. And that's something as we're looking at the way the system has historically operated versus the way we think we can maybe refine that, the way the system operates. We think that, we know that cycling tanks is better for water age. And so, but it always makes operators nervous because operators always want tanks full. Because if your tanks are full, then if there's a fire or something that draws it down, you know you always have the full tanks to support that. It's a very conservative approach, and it has the corresponding effect of it can cause a short circuit and create a slug of older water in the system.
Okay. The question that, and I'm asking if I'm clear on this, the 6,000 gallon minimum, I mean, for a bill, if I single person in the house in the wintertime, it's 6,000 gallons for that monthly bill?
That's on the sewer side.
Sewer side, not on the water side.
On the water side, the water side is however much you use. There's no
Whatever
minimum
the meter
usage.
says.
The 6,000 gallon number is a remnant of the way the sanitary sewer rate structure was set up many years ago. We think that needs to be changed. However, that we haven't gotten to that point yet. So essentially, the 6,000 gallon minimum creates revenue stability in that it assumes a floor as it relates to how much people will pay for sewer services. The other way you do that, and frankly it's more transparent, is you create a fixed fee and a variable fee. Because in the end, the revenue need is the revenue need. Whether you make it a minimum usage number of 6,000 gallons or you make it a minimum or a fixed administrative cost or a fixed cost for that service, and then a variable cost that accounts for the fact that some people use 2,000 and some people use 10,000. Mm-hmm. So that's how we will be coming back to council probably next year to look at changing the rate structure such that a homeowner can look at their sewer bill and recognize, well, if I'm only using 2,000, then I'm getting the benefit of that because my variable rate is showing a corresponding reduction. The fixed rate is because everybody has access to the system and the system is needed for whatever whatever they want to send to the system at any time. So the system has to be there and sized and available if they decide to use more. That's what goes more into the fixed cost. The variable is when we want to use more this month or less this month. And that's how we will be proposing to modify the rate structure, ultimately keeping in mind that we still need to make the revenues match the expenditures so that we can complete all the projects that we need to. So it's a little preview of what you'll be seeing maybe in 6 or 9 months from now from us.
Okay. Question on this time of year that you were doing this survey. It came in February, and this is just an opinion. My opinion is February, March, probably the best water taste and odor in Inglewood. It would be a really scary survey if you did it in August. It would get scary. But what I'm suggesting is maybe this survey should be done later in the fall than February.
Something we can look at.
Yeah, okay.
The further demoralization of it. But it's a really good point. I think what we were looking at when we wanted to do it was we wanted to get past the holidays. We wanted to get to a point where people weren't focused on other things so that they would think about that. And we thought that February was a good downtime, and we haven't done one. We couldn't find record of where there's ever been one done. And so if it makes sense to shift it to a period of time in the year when people are going to have more of a vocal response because they're in the midst of experiencing water that's not the best. Yeah, that's good data for us because it does reinforce the need for the investment.
Yeah, okay. And let's see, just question regarding on the flat rates, have we gotten ahead of, moved forward on changing those? I understood, I had the opportunity to do a ride along with the building department a couple weeks ago. And we came to one, this was a duplex, townhouses, that were built, and they ordered their water meters, as what the gentleman said much earlier, they are complete on the house now. They're getting final inspections, but they don't have water meters, so all of a sudden it becomes really difficult to sell something that you don't have any water. And they said the city, we don't have any water meters. They're not available.
So that's possible. There was, and we have adjusted that. I believe, did we just bring that to council just recently, right? So it was an approval for purchase of meters, because what we ended up with was there was a predicted rate of just replacement, but what wasn't foreseen was the number of the demand for new meters associated with the development. And so we just brought a purchase order to get an inventory that's much more significant so that we can ensure that we don't have that issue moving forward.
And I guess then my question is, have we received those actual meters within our supply, within our inventory to be supplying them to somebody that's, according to what this individual said, was they're on back order.
Entirely possible, but we can check into it. We can look into that one. And if you have an address, we can potentially look into it
get the address
in more detail.
I can get the address.
Okay.
Member Woodward, you mind if I pass it over to Mayor Pro Tem, or do you have more questions?
No, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Mayor Pro Tem?
One of the challenges I'm having is I'm looking at this cost of water delivered is I'm also looking at my water bill. And I'm having trouble making the direct connection between the Ward household used 4,000 gallons of water last month, and that water cost X per gallon because the city's rate is X per gallon on the water, or per 1,000 gallons. And I looked through our fee and rate resolution for last year, and I can't for the life of me find out a dollar per 1,000 gallons on that fee and rate schedule. Do we classify water usage fees in thousands of gallons? There is a usage charge that we're charging, correct?
So the usage rate is in per 1,000 gallons, and that's that 358 up there.
Okay,
And so that's the usage. So those are the three components of the water bill,
okay.
not the entire
Right.
bill.
Yeah, there's a bunch of lines on my water bill, but
Yeah.
only some of them are for water. So the one that I should be looking at is water cycle billing. And that is the usage rate plus the administrative fee?
Yes.
Okay. I
Plus the
think
capital improvement fee.
well, the
That's
capital
listed
improvement fee is
separate.
on a separate line.
Oh, sorry, okay.
Yeah, okay, I think I understand that right now, but I have to think that if I'm having difficulty understanding that, our residents are probably also having some trouble figuring out that particular scheme, $3.58 per 1,000 gallons.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. One of the other things that Sarah and her team are working on outside of the survey and the billing and the WIFIA loan and all those kinds of things is we're modifying the bill. So we're modernizing the bill. We have pulled a bunch of different examples from across the country to create a bill that is much more informative. And we anticipate that we'll be rolling that bill out. When do we think we'll be rolling that out?
We're hopefully this early fall. Yeah.
So we are designing and overhauling that bill to try to help it make more sense to the customer.
And we will list out, like, because that admin fee is definitely a question we get all the time. And that's one that we will add a specific line item for on the new bill.
Awesome, sounds great, thank you. And I'll also note that after I added everything up on my bill and divided by the 4,000 gallons usage, I got like 2 cents or something, but that's everything on the bill, sewer, concrete, all that stuff. So still pretty cheap if I did my math correctly, which I may not
That's
have.
that's probably correct. I would say you're probably close.
All right, thanks, guys.
I have a quick question before I go to Member Anderson. Regarding the discoloration question, and Director Van Ryn, correct me on this, it might be pretty timely because I think we're flushing the hydrants right now, but does that, if I remember correctly, there may be some households that actually do experience discoloration due to the flushing because of sediment that gets stirred up. Am I correct in that assumption? Nothing to do with water quality, but it just has to do with just our annual practice with fire hydrant flushing.
Yeah, it generally happens throughout the city at the time that we're flushing. So that's so that question is more of, are you experiencing it outside of a time when we would expect that people would experience it for a short period of time? So the short period of time that they experience it is we open up the hydrants because we want to run water through at a high velocity, so it kicks up everything that's settled out through the winter, and we can flush that out of the pipes. So during that week, we would fully expect that at that point in time, you'll see some kind of a discoloration, a yellowing of your water. That's due to the iron typically that's in the pipes. And then at that point in time, what you do is you just flush it through your house for a few minutes, and it usually goes away.
Thank you, Director Van Ryn. I think I'm a little bit confused on part of your answer, though. You're saying that people that took the survey are told to disregard that timing and answer the question based off the other 51 weeks of the year, or?
No, I think the question actually says within the past 6 months, have you experienced any? So the window is outside of when our flushing window would have been. So if we had said at any time in the last year, have you experienced any kind of discoloration? If people remember back to last April, they would have said, yeah, last April I got it. And what it might do is we would expect that people would say yes in that instance. What we're trying to dial into is, are you consistently experiencing problems with discoloration in your water outside of what we know is an event that we would expect because it's a process of flushing through the system?
Thank you, Director Van Ryn. I'm not sure if the public would take it that way, just because it is if you have discoloration of water, I think they're not going to remember whether it happened within the last 6 months or the last year. They just know it happened. And something that they're going to drink, they're just going to say, I remember it being yellow, and they're not really going to put 2 and 2 together that it happened during a hydrant. And plus, the amount of questions I get on it just tells me that people don't realize that that is an event that triggers discoloration of water. So, yeah, I'm not expecting the public to know that that could be a cause of some of the discoloration, but
Sure. I mean, we could look at refining we could look at refining that question to maybe gain a little bit more clarity in terms of the result that we're looking for from the community. I think the thing with this first round of the survey is these are baseline questions that we established after looking at many surveys that many utilities have done, and we took the ones that we thought were most applicable for what we were trying to baseline. And then you're always balancing trying to make it, ask a bunch of questions versus asking a small enough number of questions that people will answer it. And frankly, I was pleasantly surprised that we got 1,300 responses.
Right.
And there are many people, if you look in the comments, there are many people who care about this issue, and they take the time to write out long answers. And many of those answers are not how great the water in Inglewood is. And that's good for us to know, because then we can truly have the feedback from the community to help support why it is important for us to make this fundamental shift in approach to the water system.
thank you, Director Van Rye. Member Anderson, then Mayor Pro Tem.
That's a good segue, because one of my concerns about this is that I think you're getting a lot of good feedback, but it's not a blind taste test. These are these are changes that are going to occur quite slowly over a period of a number of years. Is there anything we can do to measure these? Like, can you measure how stagnant water, how long water has been sitting in line? Is there some test you can do? I mean, obviously you can do the hardness. I don't know. Is there some stuff where we can get hard measurements to kind of track along with the survey to know? I mean, I know we can measure hardness of the plant, but throughout the system to know if taste and quality is improving on kind of and aesthetics are improving on kind of an objective basis.
So the next step that we would look at in doing this, we did this from a high level, is a water age model. And so it's a digital model of the system to understand how the water flows through the network, and then where are the points that water might be sitting longer than other points. If you're right next to the plant, your water's getting from the plant to your tap very quickly. But if you're farther out into the farther reaches of the community, we would expect that you'd have a longer water age. We do, in our testing protocols, test for chlorine residual, which is the important disinfection number that we need to make sure that we're maintaining throughout the system. And so we do that throughout the system. So from an objective test, chlorine residual is essentially the safety of the water test that we do. As it relates to assessing more aesthetic things around taste and odor, the first step would be to really dial into that water age model, which we finally have a water system model, and we've done our first cut at understanding water age. And then it's a matter of just further refinement and analysis into that to really target locations that we see that there is a potential problem.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem, and then Member Wink.
I have to admit that Inglewood is the first place I've lived in, quite possibly the only place I've ever been where at any time the water came out less than clear. And I'm wondering if this is a uniquely Inglewood phenomenon, this coloration in water, or if it does occur in other places. I personally find it pretty disturbing when I get a glass of tap water and it has color. It's not supposed to until I put something in it that's colored. So what you've explained sort of what contributes to that, but is this something due to the age of the system, or something due to the water, or some combination of issues? Is it something we can fix, I guess, is the bottom line question I have.
So I'll answer this in two parts. One, I think we think there's a correlation to the age of the system, and that's partly what creates a lot of times your color comes from iron or manganese. That's essentially what it is. It's a mineral type of coloration. So we think there's a correlation. We don't know the degree to which yet because we just don't have that level of understanding yet. We're developing that level of understanding through the models and the sampling and the report that we'll be talking about next. As it relates to other communities, I have worked with other communities where this is a consistent issue. And if you're on Denver Basin groundwater, if you're pulling from 2,000 feet below the surface, it's high in iron, it's high in manganese. And so what happens often in those communities is red water events. So manganese is red, iron comes out more yellow. And so some of the other communities I worked at down south who were highly reliant on Denver Basin groundwater have repeated significant issues with red water issues. It's a common issue because the source water has that iron and manganese in it. Now, if you're comparing to Denver, it's pristine mountain water that comes down through the systems that were built many, many years ago, and that water is much nicer than some of the other source water and is not impacted by essentially what are aesthetic issues. So if you live down south of the metro area, you probably hear more about red water events, and that's what they call them.
Okay, and part two of the question, do you think that it is fixable? Is it something that we can fix? Or will this be 20 years from now, we'll be talking about the same thing?
I think a lot of this is fixable. It depends on level of investment, really. I think as we've talked about, and the second part of the presentation, we'll get into this a little bit, is that source water component we think is one of the biggest issues that we can make an immediate change on to really help drive a significant improvement, most specifically around hardness, which is one of the most common problems that people have. We have issues around coloration, but like I said, other communities I come from, it's actually more prevalent in those communities. Our issue is hardness in terms of when we compare to other communities, our hardness is pretty significant, and that's something that we routinely hear from customers is that it ruins my hot water heater, it ruins every aspect of my system because it calcifies and creates a problem. So we think that city ditch piping project is one of the most significant steps that we can take to really help address that.
Thank you.
Member Wink?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but am I correct that this whole discussion should have ended at 7:40? It's now 8 o'clock and we still have half more to go and then a discussion on WIFIA? Like we have another section still to come? Okay,
That is correct.
thanks.
Any other questions? Mayor Pro Tem, your light's still on. That's a good segue to you, Director Van Rye. We really botched the timing on this one, but we're on to the second part.
That's
so.
okay. The second one we can actually kind of run through fairly quickly. It's basically just we have data to support the taste, odor, and hardness issues that we have just been talking about. So if you look at the background, this has been something that has been reported since the 80s, or probably even longer. We did the master plan. We did a taste, odor, and hardness study. We've done a survey, and you can see the correlating projects. And then ultimately, we're looking into the future at making process improvements at the water plant. So that's generally our schedule. Taste, odor, and hardness. Taste and odor characteristics are not water quality, or safety, they are aesthetics. And you can see the different terminologies of how people would describe it. This is really the data around hardness, and you can see that the top line is the Union Ave intake, and you can see how high it fluctuates significantly and how high it will get at times. We had an experience this February where it went off the chart in terms of hardness for a couple weeks. Whereas if you look at where city ditch hardness is it stays pretty consistently right at 150 or lower, and that's the that's the importance of the city ditch piping project. Things we'd be looking at are treatment process improvements, like we've talked about. This softening would be a project to come after we understand, after we stabilize the source water through the city ditch project, and then distribution system optimization. City ditch piping project is the priority. Big Dry Creek diversion is an important project for us to finish, and we're partway there. We are working to get this project finished. It has been a challenge to complete due to engineering and construction issues. And this is basically what we've talked a lot about, which is city ditch piping, Big Dry Creek diversion, and water softening and process improvements. That might be the fastest presentation I've ever done.
It was the fastest presentation that you've given, Director Van Rye. Any additional questions? Member Wink, you still have your light on. Member Woodward.
Yeah, I just have a question. On our water towers, I see water towers, I haven't noticed within the metro area, but I see them out in rural areas where there's cell towers on top and stuff. Have we ever been approached on that type of thing? Or
We actually do now. We have some lessees on some of at least one of our towers.
Okay.
We have a cell lessee on that. It's a thing that we're looking at in terms of, is the agreement beneficial to the city? It's on our list of priorities. It hasn't made it to the top yet, but it's something we're aware of. But it's something we do.
Good. Okay. Great. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other questions from council?
Mayor, I just have a
Yeah, Mayor
comment.
Protem, go ahead.
Is it appropriate? Looking at the survey result, one of the things that was most stark to me, and perhaps not actually related to the water, was the question about how long people have lived in Inglewood. And if you look at the percentages, it's surprising. 0 to 5 years, 36%. Over 20 years, 32%. And then there's a pretty sizable gap in the 6 to 20 year range. And I'm just wondering, from a strategic point of view, if there's something we need to address relative to longevity in Inglewood and quality of life overall, because we seem to be losing people at 6 years. And so I just wanted to point that out as part of tonight's discussion. It came up, and maybe it was more appropriate for member's choice, but it was on my mind at the moment. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, maybe during your member's choice we can discuss it, but anything else? Member Nooncamp.
I just have a comment as well, and I just want to say thank you to this team for coming and presenting this information. I know some of this is hard truths for us to hear, but so many of the comments in the survey are, this has been a problem for such a long time, and it's really encouraging to be able to tell citizens that we have a plan. We have a plan now of what we're going to do, and it's not going to be overnight, but it's something that we're going to really focus on, and it's a huge priority for me. I know it's a priority for the council, and I just really want to commend this staff and to say publicly that I have a lot of faith in the leadership and in the plan, and I'm really grateful for the diligence. So thanks for tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Nooncamp. I second that as well. I'm glad to have a plan for water. I know that it came up during the last running of city council members during that whole thing. So I know it's top of mind for a lot of our citizens. So it's always great to have these type of discussions. So with that, we'll just move on to the approval of the emergency ordinance for WIFIA. And I think Deputy Director Sarah Stone, I'm sure that you already have the interest rate ready in terms of what we're going to be discussing, but yeah, up next is just the second reading on the WIFIA agreement.
Sure, thank you. So the interest rate today was at 2.03%, or excuse me, 3.0. 2%. Oh man, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so it's leveled off in the last few days around 3%. And tentatively good news from EPA, they're running through their last approvals in the next likely 2 days, and we will close on Thursday instead of in June. So
That
that's
is
my
great
update.
news.
This Thursday, yes.
Great news, Deputy Director. Any questions from council? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve CB 30?
So moved.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Any additional comments? Seeing none, can we please vote?
Member Anderson,
Aye.
Member Noonenkamp,
Aye.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward,
Aye.
Member Wink,
Aye.
Member Woodward,
Aye.
Mayor Sierra.
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you so much. And thank you very much to you both for the presentation and
Thank
all
you.
the information. Thank you. Now moving on to reports from boards and commissions. Anyone want to get us started? I have just one. I'll keep it quick, but ETAC did have a meeting a week ago Thursday. They went over the capital improvement projects, and they did provide their recommendations. I guess one part of that I kind of brought up during the meeting as well was just trying to figure out a way that obviously ETAC had their way of doing their priorities. I'm sure Budget Advisory Committee has their way of doing their priorities, same with planning and zoning, but just trying to get standardization around that. I think what we did on the ETAC was that we had our list of priorities, our tier 1, and then the question was what from tier 2 and 3 should move up and what from tier 1 should move back. There is something along those lines, and we were just trying to figure out, is BAC doing the same thing, planning and zoning, but it may be something that we may want to discuss, whether it's worth our time or not, but I'm just thinking that maybe some standardization around that might be good. But there was good feedback regarding just some of the projects that we had for future capital improvements. But that is it. All I have from boards and commissions. Anyone else? Member Anderson.
Yeah, I was just looking back through my notes. I've had 3 board and commission meetings. I don't think there's anything to report from the Water and Sewer Board because we've seen it all here tonight and last week. The hang on. Yep. Sustainability Commission. We had the Evan Anderson, who is our Assistant Urban Forester here in Inglewood, presented to the Sustainability Commission on all the trees in Inglewood and kind of our program of forest, just kind of making sure we're maintaining our urban forest. Really interesting information. There's 2,700 trees on public property in Inglewood, and there is actually, it was pretty cool to discover this, an online map you can go to. And if you're in any park or on any public right-of-way, you can pull it up and look at what tree it is, click on it, it'll tell you what kind of tree it is, and the diameter and various other stats about the tree, and talked about a variety of different issues with trees, of course, the emerald ash borer and a number of other concerns, but that's the biggest one right now, and kind of what the goal is in terms of increasing tree coverage or tree canopy coverage, especially in areas that are lower income, those kind of things. Higher tree canopy coverage tends to be associated with wealthier neighborhoods. So there are programs out there to help with some of those issues. And next year, I believe they have some plans to increase kind of the Arbor Day program to not just sell the bigger trees, but give away smaller trees as well. So very good presentation. And then there was some discussion within the Sustainability Commission on events that that's transitioning from KB now to the Sustainability Commission. Do they want to continue doing or the hazardous waste pickup event as well as the leaf recycling event? Are those things that are those a priority for the Sustainability Commission? And is it a time to kind of rethink what the priorities for this commission could be now that it's changing? The decision ultimately was to continue forward with those this year, but maybe not as much next year. And I think it kind of highlighted the need within Inglewood to maybe look at a more robust volunteer kind of program for volunteer events in general, because it's a lot. I think the commission, the people who had been on as KB and are still in the commission, felt like it was quite a burden for the commission to run some of those events, long volunteer hours, and some of the commissioners were at the events for multiple shifts in a row, especially the leaf recycling event was, just highly utilized and required a lot of volunteer effort. So anyway, I think it's a good discussion, and I think it does kind of speak to a broader need we have in Inglewood for having some kind of, I don't know if it would be a volunteer coordinator or something like that to not just do like the public, fun market events that we have, but also some more just volunteer-oriented events for the good of our city. So the other meeting I had was the Housing Authority, and there's nothing really new to report from. There's no LIHTC projects going on or any other significant projects right now, just kind of an update on current occupancy rates and financial situation, everything like that. So that's it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Anyone else? Member Woodward.
Mike.
The ride along that I did on the building inspections, that was a half day, really well spent. Good workout too. Walking up and down and up and down. But I just highly recommend, there's police ride-alongs, and I've done a number of those, and I really wanted to do a building inspection ride-along, and it was just really well worth it. And the individual that I got to ride with, the inspector, is really knowledgeable. He's licensed in more than one trade, so he was able to check more than one trades. And he has quite the relationship with the contractors, and is he's there to get things done with a really good attitude, which I think makes a big difference. I remember years ago, back in the 80s, in Glendale, going through a screw inspection on a commercial building, and then the inspector came in and didn't pass them because the screws weren't the proper amount away from each other, and he wouldn't tell the contractor where that problem was. He thought the contractor should go find it, and he would come back and attend a couple days after he got re-notified. Well, our inspectors aren't like that. They're there to help. But it's a great experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. You jumped ahead of us. We were doing boards and commissions, but thank you for that. Anyone else in terms of council members' choice tonight? Seeing none, just over to City Manager Lewis for his City Manager's choice.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of items. Number one, placed on your on the dais, if you will, is this new card that we are providing to our partners who work in veteran services. And just wanted to thank Member Wink for her leadership. You may remember that she brought up the need for some veterans recognition. And so you all talked about parking spaces, ultimately directing staff, all of which was Tim Dodd, Assistant City Manager, to talk to other organizations. He did that, created a survey that was sent to the VFW and other organizations. There's actually quite a bit of work, and so I appreciate that he came back with what they really would like is discounts at city services, and you all gave that final okay in a second study session on the topic, but this is the final product of that. So we have created also a website on the city's website, a page, if you will, that discusses those benefits. And then last but not least, we are as you know, have opened Centennial Park, a parking lot at Centennial Park, as a location to take down trees. This is a problem all over the city, and we are monitoring How quickly that is filling up, I will say that as of noon today, the parking lot, the number of feet, it was 15 feet high and many more feet long in terms of the pile that's being formed. We are checking IDs for that to make sure those are Inglewood residents, but we are getting a number of contractors that are saying, but I'm coming from an Inglewood resident, and in many cases, particularly early on, we were letting those contractors in, so we're having to crack down a little bit on that, as many of those tree contractors have places to take their materials already. But long story short, this is going to be expensive for us to shred all of these trees, and we want to continue to provide this service through Wednesday, and after that probably need to cut that off. But I wanted to check in with council on that because and just let you know that I have authorized the expenditure of up to $50,000 to get those chopped. But right now, because of how backed up all of the tree contractors are in the city, we're looking at the end of June before the first available contractor can get to our pile, and it will take weeks for them to get that pile chopped, particularly through Wednesday when we expect this to no longer be provided. The pile will grow even more. So we are through emergency procurement process authorizing that up to $50,000. If that needs to go over $50,000, we'll bring that to City Council, and I would look to City Attorney Niles to just verify that I restated that process correctly. She and I have been checking in today on that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. But I did want to check in with council to say, if, obviously we do not have, a contractor or anyone online to go and pick up trees throughout the city. And they are, for instance, on my block, about every other household already has a pile in the street that are waiting to be taken off. But wanted to check in with council on your thoughts on what we're doing so far.
Thank you, City Manager Lewis. Member Anderson.
Thank you, City Manager. I think it's great. I'm glad we're doing this. Do we have, where's this coming out of the budget, or will we need to look at an appropriation for this amount?
Well, we've had a little disagreement on that internally today, as Parks has indicated that they don't think that they have that in their budget. Finance is looking at that budget to verify that that's the case, but we are going to try to use existing resources for this expenditure. If that is not adequate, we would come to you using our contingency fund to fund any outstanding balance of that in the form of a budget amendment. So we do have a contingency, but you would have to allocate it to the Parks Department to expend that.
Okay, then in terms of I think it's probably good to cut it off at Wednesday. Otherwise, we could go on forever collecting branches. But is there a way? Are we communicating that already, or can we really make sure that's blasted out just as well as the start of it was blasted out? That we're going to cut this off so people know.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I think that word has definitely gotten around from our social media posts. I mean, it was almost instantly used as soon as the post went up. And so I think that new word has spread over Nextdoor and other platforms. So I do think we're getting good publicity on that. And we will be doing, in fact, we're already doing the publicity on the Wednesday cutoff.
Okay, good, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I was really happy to see this program. My neighbor and her extended family are long-term Inglewood residents, and they worked on 3 separate properties and were able to deliver the branches to Centennial over the weekend. They're very excited about it and grateful for the program. I have absolutely no problem at all passing a supplemental appropriation if one is necessary to continue the program through Wednesday. One thing I'll note is that my neighbor did share with me that they knew someone who had taken a truckload to the transfer center, and the transfer center had told them, "Oh, that'll be $200, but the city of Inglewood is taking them for free over there." So that could be a portion of our traffic. I don't know how many people use the transfer center, but I would suspect that it benefited some people who are and aren't residents of Inglewood. And, in as much as we can serve the needs of our city when something unanticipated like this happens, I think it's a great program.
Thanks for that feedback. And I will mention that before we started providing the driver's license or utility bill requirement over the weekend, I'm sure we did get some non-residents and or contractors. But we have cracked down on that as of this morning.
Member Woodward.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can get a chipper there and start chipping it and providing it to citizens, come and pick up as much as you want or whatever, and start getting rid of it that way, because I'm sure there's plenty of people that are looking for mulch right now. And that's perfect stuff for it.
Thank you for the question. I'll pass that along as a request.
And the other question, are we just looking at one contractor, or would we be, I mean, I know of some small wood or small tree contractors that have chippers and stuff. They may be willing to go over there and start chipping away. I mean, putting the stuff in there.
I don't have that information, but I can get that. You know, one of the challenges of any private business in contracting with the city is our insurance requirements. And, you know, we do require a very healthy liability insurance. And so many times some of the, you know, smaller mom and pop folks can't or don't have that coverage. But it's certainly something that the question I'll pose to Parks.
Yeah, I think they're a little bit larger than that. I think they have insurance and liability. Thank you.
Anything else, City Manager? Oh, Member Anderson, do you still have, no? City Manager? All right, with that, it's about 8:25 and we are now adjourned. We will see you in 2 weeks. Have a good night.